Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 125 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you're doing well. Hope things are going your way. We appreciate you being here tonight, whether you're watching this live or whether you watch it later on. We hope that it's something that is beneficial to you. We hope it's something that lifts you up, and hopefully we learn something, in what we study together tonight. It's been a pretty nice day outside. At least it has been here in Jonesboro, and so I hope you've enjoyed it as well. We also want to extend an invitation to you. If you're someone who is in the Portia area, then please feel free to come by and see us sometime. We would love to see you. Right now, we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so if you're in our area around one of those times, so feel free to stop by. We would love to see you, love to talk with you, and worship with you. Right now, we're having a class on Ephesians on Sunday morning that one of our elders, Robert, is teaching. And on Wednesday night, we're going through the book of Matthew. And we're on Matthew chapter 19 right now, I believe. And I'm teaching that class. And so if you're, like I said, if you're in the area, we're located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And so come by and see us sometime. Although also, if you ever have any suggestions or questions about, what we study tonight, please feel free to get in contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your suggestions for future things to cover. I mean, love to help with any questions that we can. And because it's always good to be someone who's looking after and seeking after an understanding of these things. It's good to have. We got several people here tonight. We got Carlene. She is here. She says good evening. Hope that you are doing well. We got Cheryl Herring. She is here as well. She says always good to see and hear you. It's always good to see you as well. And we got the Hudson as well. Chris Hudson. She says hi, and they are watching. Good to have you guys here. Hope everything is going well for you. Hope you're feeling good and things are going your way. We always appreciate you guys being here tonight. We're going to take a brief look, at a story in Matthew chapter 5, tonight. Halloween is coming up. It's a time in which, culturally, speaking, we oftentimes decorate things with kind of spooky decorations. They have talk about ghosts and goblins and things of that sort. And so it's kind of the time of the year that people usually take a look at some of the kind of spookier or odder parts of the Bible. And in Mark chapter 5, we read an interesting story in which Jesus has an encounter, with a man who is possessed by a demon. And demons are something that is often, dramatized or often, promoted in like that type of, in movies and such. And as far as, the kind of the shows, that you might see, oftentimes a demon is portrayed, as something that is, scary, something that is, a very powerful being, and they're not nice things, that's for sure. But we're going to take a look at a case in which Jesus has this encounter with one, and maybe talk a little bit about what that means for us today. How does that affect us, today? And so I'll bring up a screen here, and we can read our passage together, and we will get started. There we go. All right. Mark chapter 5, and this is a case. Mark is a pretty concise, gospel, but this takes place, pretty early on in the book, as he's saying, looking at, chapter 5. So starting in verse 1, it says, "They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want from me? Jesus, Son of the Most High God, in God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. And a large herd of pigs was feeding was feeding on the nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs and allow us to go into them." And he gave them permission. And the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank and into the lake, were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it, those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. And then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. And so we have this case in which Jesus is going out, on his ministry, and he encounters this man who is possessed, by a demon. And so if you're asking, the question, like I said, we oftentimes see, demons portrayed in movies and shows and such. And if you ask if demons are real, well, the answer is yes, because you look in. You look in, the scriptures, and they pop up, several times, throughout the gospel story. We find not only this man, there's other people as well that Jesus would run into, the apostles would run into, that are possessed, by a demon, and these sometimes the demons are kind of portrayed as these big scary beasts that have claws and teeth and such. But a demon, as described in the Bible, is a spiritual being. It's not a physical being. It's not something that is going to bite you or claw you, but it's a spiritual being. And for that reason, it had to have something to bind itself to. It had to have something in order to possess. So in this case, this man had a whole host of demons that were kind of jointly, possessing him, and they were causing him to do all sorts of things, to cut himself, to break away from chains, and to do all sorts of stuff that were unusual and abnormal. And yet it was because of these demons, that were with him, that were possessing in him. And so they are real things, that existed, at the time, of the Gospels. And we find, as I said, Jesus in this interaction with the man, and also other interactions, as well. But he comes up to them, and this demon, these demons, they recognize who Jesus is. These aren't these aren't like dumb spirits. They aren't things without intelligence, but they recognize exactly who Jesus is, and then they know exactly what he can do. And so if you look at I believe it's in verse 6. It says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God?" These demons knew exactly who Jesus was, and they didn't just know him from, like from other people, but they knew Jesus. They knew that he was the Son of God. They knew that he was, the Messiah. They knew that he was, the one who could, take away the sins, of the world. That he had the authority, to cast them out. And so he makes, and ironically, it's one of the better confessions that we read in the Gospels comes from this demon. He says, when he says, "What do you want with me, Son of the Most High God?" There was a lot of good people that we read about in the gospel story that never made a confession quite like this. But here we have a demon, and he makes this good confession that Jesus is the Son of the Most High God. Does that mean this was a good being? Does that mean that this was a positive or a righteous being? Well, no, it doesn't. These demons, by their nature, are things that oppose God. They're beings that oppose, the will of God, and they're never something that does, anything for good or anything for a sense of righteousness. But they're always doing something that is against, what God would want. And so he, and so he. And so he, makes this confession. And if you remember, I think it's in James, James chapter 2, and where James, he actually mentions, demons, and in that case, where and talking about belief, he says, faith without works, is dead, and if you have to have belief and you have to have works. Both of those are combined. You'll make kind of blend into what you need to do. And he says, and in talking about how belief has to have works to go along with it to authenticate it. He says even the demons believe, and they tremble. And we see that James' words, they come. He was exactly telling the truth, because when we read here in Mark chapter 5 that this demon knew exactly who Jesus was, and this demon believed in him, and he was afraid of him. He says, don't torture me, because I'm afraid of what you can do. And so James was absolutely telling the truth there in James chapter 2. And so you might ask the question, when we read about these demons and what they could do. They were powerful beings. They had the ability to do some incredible things, but they weren't more powerful than the Son of God. They weren't more powerful than what Jesus could do, but rather Jesus had complete authority over these things, and he could cast them out whenever with just a simple word. And it didn't require any extravagant ceremony or any type of specific location or any type of special object. It didn't require any of that, but Jesus just spoke the words come out of him. When you truly have the authority, all you have to do is command, and the demons would listen. And so you have to ask the question, do demons still exist today? We read about them in the Bible, we read about them in the scriptures. Paul talks about them, Jesus talks about them, James talks about them. Do we still deal with them today? Are they still something that is present, working in our world, today? I would suggest that they are not. I believe that demons do not have any power over this world today. If you take a look, there's a passage that we read about in 1 Corinthians, and you have to let me find it here. I didn't look it up beforehand, but it's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Where Paul is kind of talking about it's known as the chapter on love, and because of the great extent that Paul goes into talk about how important love is, and how wonderful it is, and how necessary it is for a Christian to have. And in verse 8 here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It says, love never ends, but as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we only see a reflection, as in a mirror. but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, but then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love remain, these three, and the greatest of these is love. And so he says, love, never ends. Love has, no end, to it. Love is not something that is temporary, not something, that just comes out in spurts, but love is eternal. He says, love, never ends. But he says, as for prophecies, these will come to an end. As for tongues, these will come to an end. As for knowledge, as for, these special things, they eventually they're going to come, to an end, because their usefulness, that the purpose that they were given to people, would come to an end. As we know, during the time of the early church, they had a number of spiritual gifts. They could, speak in tongues. They could, heal people. They could, prophesy. They had, special knowledge. They had, all these spiritual gifts that they could do through the power of the Holy Spirit. And it caused some problems in the Corinthian church about, about who was greater. They were kind of, using their spiritual gifts to kind of elevate themselves, and that was not the purpose of what they were for. But he says, these things, these spiritual gifts, they're coming to an end. They have a limited, time span. Love is eternal; it's never going to end. But these spiritual gifts, they're going to end. And one of these things that they did, one of these miracles, one of these abilities that the early church had, that the apostles had, was to exorcise or to cast out, a demon, and to bring a demon, out of an individual. And there's a case in which the apostles, when during Jesus' ministry, the apostles try to cast out a demon, but they're unable, and so they come to Jesus and they say, why can't we cast this demon out? And he has to kind of instruct them on their faith, on what to do. But if since we do not have spiritual gifts today, we do not have the ability to do these things. Why would demons be allowed to affect our world, to be someone who caused havoc on our world, without our ability to fight back, without our ability to combat that? As we said, they had this ability to do this, but we don't have it anymore, because the age of spiritual gifts has passed. And so are we just helpless? Are we someone who can't fight against these things? Or just like spiritual gifts, for the time that demons were allowed to be on this earth, was that limited as well? You may ask, well, why then do we read about them in the Gospels and in the times of the early church? Why do we read about them then? Jesus, he shows his ultimate authority, and he shows the authority that he has as the Son of God by the fact that even these demons, these evil creatures, these evil spirits, they listen to him, and they are compelled to listen to him. It's not just a thing where they're listening and they're deciding whether to follow Jesus or not. They have no choice. They are compelled to listen to what Jesus has to say. There's a passage in if you take a look at Zechariah chapter 13, there's an interesting passage that he writes here that kind of talk about the age of these things, and maybe some things that would happen in the future. In Zechariah chapter 13, starting in verse 1, it says, "On that day a fountain shall be opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On that day, says the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of idols from the land, and so that they shall be remembered no more. And also I will remove from the land the prophets and the unclean spirit. And if any prophets appear again, their fathers and mothers who bore them will say to them, You shall not live, for you speak lies in the name of the Lord. And their fathers and their mothers who bore them shall pierce them through when they prophesy. On that day the prophets shall be ashamed every one of their visions when they prophesy, and they will not put on a hairy mantle in order to deceive. But each of them will say, I am no prophet, I am a tiller of the soil, for the land has been my possession since my youth. And there's some other things that kind of go along there with that. But he says, I will remove from the land the prophets, and the unclean spirit. Kind of, attesting that, there's a time in which, the time of prophecy, is going to end. Like in the Old Testament, we read about people such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, we read about Elijah, people who were prophets, David, Moses, people who foretold things that were going to happen, in the future. But the time of the prophecy was going to end, as well. And he says, I'm going to remove you from the land, the prophets, and the unclean spirit. Kind of promoting, the fact, that, those things are going to be removed, one day. Their purpose was to demonstrate, the authority that Jesus has, here on this earth. And once the ministry of Jesus was done, once the time of the early church was done, the time of spiritual gifts, they were no longer to be a part, of what we do, today, which is, something interesting, to take a look at. And sometimes you will see, some of the more charismatic, religions, try to promote this, and then, they say, well, and sometimes they make a big show of, exercising what they suppose is a demon in somebody. But according to the scriptures, according to what we read in the Bible, there's no indication of whether or not, these things are still active, today. Like I said, we don't have the ability to cast these things out, anymore. And so why would they be allowed, to roam, this earth? And so I certainly don't believe that there's still someone who affects us, today. There's Paul, he had an encounter with one in Acts chapter 16. If you remember that story, when they were evangelizing, and this girl comes up behind them, and for days and days, she cries out, and she doesn't say anything bad. She says something that is quite good, but yet it's still something that was getting on Paul's nerves, as we see, and so he was going to had to take care of it. In verse 16, it says, one day as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a female slave who had a spirit of divination, and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, these men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation. And she kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And it came out that very hour. To my knowledge, this is the latest, this is the latest, exorcism that we have, in the scriptures, in which Paul he meets, this female slave who goes, behind the men, keeps proclaiming, these men are slaves of the Most High God, and they proclaim to you the way of salvation. And she was very valuable to her masters, because it says that she brought, a lot of money, because she had the spirit of divination, by fortune telling. And so it was big business, for them. But Paul, he says, I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And it came out, that very hour. And if you read on, beyond the story, that when the owners, when they saw that their chance to make money was gone, that she no longer had the power to look in the future, through the power of the Spirit, they caused all sort of ruckus and tried to kill Paul, tried to arrest Paul, and take it out on him. But this in this case, this demon gave this girl this special ability, but Paul was able to cast her out, in that sense. And so, it's like I say, it's dramatized, a lot, in in movies, in shows, and even in part of the religious world, about the presence, of these things. And so to kind of recap, what we've talked about, today so far, is that, do demons exist or not? They do. We have proof of that in the Bible. They are real beings, and there is someone who is spoken of in the Bible. Are they physical beings, or are they, spiritual beings? The Bible speaks about them as only as spiritual beings. They never have manifest any type of physical form, any type of scary monster or any type of thing or of that sort. But they are spiritual beings that in the time of the Bible had to possess someone in order to do anything. Do these demons believe in Jesus? They absolutely do. Every time Jesus comes in contact with one, or even in the case of Paul, as you see here, they proclaim that Jesus is the Son of God, that He has the way of salvation. But yet these are not righteous beings, but they're workers of darkness. They're workers of things that go against what the Bible would have us to say. Do we still have demons in our world today? I would answer that the answer to that is no, because the time of prophecy has ended, the time of spiritual gifts has ended, the time of tongues has ended, and the time of the demons being allowed to affect our world in that way has ended as well, along with those things. Jesus was able to demonstrate His power and His authority over not only the physical world, but also the spiritual world as well, by being able to cast out these demons and have them listen to what He has to say. We know that Jesus, He demonstrates His authority over the physical world when He calms a storm, when He walks on water, when He does those things. He's able to demonstrate that type of authority. But also when it comes to spiritual things, He demonstrates that authority by being able to cast out these demons. And so that's it's an interesting thing to take a look at, especially during this time of year. And it's a kind of a mysterious subject, but it's one that I hope that has benefited us by taking a look at it tonight. But I think that's about all we have here for tonight. I hope this is something that has benefited you. Hope it's done you some good, and I hope you have a wonderful week here coming up. I hope that everything goes well for you. We always appreciate you being here and studying with us tonight. We'll be back here next Thursday night, for another episode, be episode 126. And so if this has done you any good, please feel free to share it with anyone you think it would benefit. And come join us next week. We'll be back here for another look at God's Word. But until then, I hope that you go out and be the light of the world, and hope you glorify God in everything that you do. I'll catch you next time.